En op andere projecten, zoals Bijbelschool, normaal 7 maanden.
Heeft hij ook verteld, ja. Dat binnenkort dus van ons Ja, nee, we praten wel met elkaar hier, hè?
Ja, weet ik, het is mijn eerste avond.
Is yours.
Right. Nice. Welcome everyone to Bible Night 3 on the Bible Overview series. And tonight we'll be going into Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. Before I hand it over to Jaap, who's actually going to teach tonight, I just have 2 announcements. So, something to be aware of, which we'll also post in the chat, is that next week we have a location change because this is actually in use. So we're going to another building, the Cleft, which is like a 5-minute walk that way. On the outer side, Spoorburgwal 63. So we'll send you the address and all. It's one of Youth Commission's other buildings. And we will have our teaching there. So you get to see another building, but so just be alert of like, okay, don't automatically go here next week. Make sure you read the chat and that you know that we're going to be just close by, but yeah, somewhere else. Alright, then one more thing. I just want to give a heads up on our next Bible Night series. Because on the 18th of November, we'll start a new series of 4 evenings. Where we'll go back, or we'll go into the book of Acts and certain passages, and we're going to go into inductively approaching the text and how to do that. So we've done those type of series before. And basically what we do with the small groups at the end of these sessions, like you get questions, but the goal of those evenings is to actually to be able to, hey, how do you approach the text yourself, and how do you make your own questions? How do you observe well what's in the text? How do you, with some historical background, where do you find some historical background? How do you interpret the text, and then how do you bring it into your own life? How do you apply it? So the goal of those evenings will be a bit different, and will be a bit more focused on equipping you guys of like, hey, how do you engage with the Bible, and how can you study and apply it in your lives? Where this is more teaching focused, that will be a bit more small groups and trying out, making your own questions, and just being practical together. So that will start on the 18th of November, 4 evenings as well, running until the 9th of December. But we'll also give you a heads up about that in the chat. Then we're going to get started with Jaap, who's going to teach, and I just want to invite Jaap and pray for him, and then we'll go into this evening. All right. Jesus, we thank you for who you are, and we ask that you're present in this room, and that you will bless this evening. Will you bless Jaap as he teaches on Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, and how we can see your character, and how we can see your story, your redemptive plan throughout these books as well, God. And we pray that you will speak to us tonight, and that you will stir our hearts for, what would you have for us? Will you highlight things to us that we might not have seen before about you, Jesus? And we pray that you will be our guide, and that you will lead this evening, and that we can have fun as a community, and that you will be in it all, and that you will be our focus through it all, Jesus. In your mighty name. Amen. All right.
Thank you, Sander. Well, I'm very excited to be here tonight to teach, to tell you guys about Conquest Day. It's very big on the screen. A lot of people are looking in. They're like, what is he going to talk about? I understand that, but we're going to talk about the books of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth today. I only have an hour of teaching, but if you have any questions, just raise your hand, just ask. I might have time to go into some, and if not, we can always talk about it on break or later. So I just want you to know that. And these books are going to show us how God's people, the Israelites, entered the Promised Land, how they conquered it, what happens when they were there, but also what went wrong, and how through all these events, God's redemptive plan continues. But before we start, I want to remind you this is an overview series. So we're looking at God's plan from Genesis all the way to Revelation. But I want to do some review first. So if you were there on night 1 and night 2. Just tell me what was highlighted to you, what did you like, what did you remember of God's redemptive plan through the books we've covered yet. Anyone? Did you remember anything? Just something you liked.
God's provision.
God's provision. In what part? Or just in general?
As from the first night, right?
Yeah. We talked about God's provision with the binding of Isaac and how God provided. Yeah. That's good.
I wasn't there, but I can imagine.
That's good.
No, that it's beautiful to see every time when it went wrong, that God, it's also with Noah, for example, he decided to, okay, I'm going to start over again. So it's a God that never gives up, so he wants to continue redeeming, for example.
Yeah.
And there are other stories there.
God is always looking for a way to continue his story. Yeah. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'm going to give a brief overview. So we started with creation, with Adam and Eve, where God made everything good. And it started out all good, but very soon we have the fall. Sin entered the world. And because of the sin, Adam and Eve couldn't stay in the Garden of Eden, and they had to leave. Over time, the next big person we see is Abraham. God calls Abraham, and he promises him to give him a nation, many descendants, and, very important, God says, through you, I will bless every nation. So not just the Israelites, but everyone. And Abraham's family, people of Israel, continue to grow, and eventually they move into Egypt, where they also become slaves after a while. And for 400 years, they live as slaves in Egypt, until God raises up Moses. And Moses led the people out of Egypt into the wilderness, through the Red Sea, of course. And last week, Willem talked about what happened in the wilderness, Mount Sinai, where God gave the law, the 10 Commandments, the sacrificial law, the moral law. This is how he wants his people to live. This is how the people of Israel could be a holy nation that are meant to be an example to the nations around them. That was the goal. But we also know that in the wilderness, a lot of things go wrong. And for 40 years, they wander through the wilderness. And that's the point where we're going to start today. Because in those 40 years, a whole generation has died, and a new generation is ready to move into the promised land. Moses is as a leader of people, one of the last ones to die from that generation, and Joshua is ready to step in to take over his role as a leader. So the question now is, will Israel trust God as they enter promised land? Here you see just a timeline to kind of have an idea of when this happened and how long everything took. Around 1400 BC, that's when the people entered promised land. People of Israel crossed the Jordan, I'm going to talk about that, and they entered promised land. Then there's a few decades that they took to conquer the land. And that's the time of Joshua. After the time of Joshua, we'll go into the book of Judges, which is approximately 350 years, around 1400 until 1050 before Christ. And in this time of Judges, we have the book of Ruth. So the book of Ruth, we'll finish with that in this teaching. It takes place during the time of the Judges.
So Jaap, where are we when we are in the wilderness?
The wilderness is right
Okay,
before.
we're at the start.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's where we're
Because
gonna
that's where we
start.
left last
Yeah, that's
week.
where you
Okay.
left, and that's where we're gonna start tonight. So they've been in the wilderness for 40 years, and this is the point where they're ready to cross the Jordan. Yeah, good question. So the book of Joshua. When the book of Joshua begins, Moses had just died. The people are camped east of the Jordan, looking across the land that God had promised their ancestors. And God speaks directly to Joshua. He says multiple times to be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. In Joshua 1, we actually read this 3 times, and in Deuteronomy, we've already read this a couple times. So God says to Joshua often to be strong and courageous. And I can imagine that, because Joshua had some big shoes to fill. Moses was the leader of the people. He led the people out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, through the wilderness, and now they have a new leader. Is God going to be as much this new leader as he was with Moses? Maybe Moses had some doubts himself. Am I able to do this? Lead a whole nation into a land full of enemies? But God is faithful. And I think he knows that Joshua needed to hear this a couple times. So that's why he reminds him of that. After God speaking to Joshua about this, the nations, oh, that image is terrible on the picture. It wasn't as bad when I made this slideshow. I'm very sorry, but you're supposed to see the priests with the tabernacle. That's Joshua, and he's leading the people through the Jordan. I'm sorry. If this is so bad, I guess there is going to be more pictures that are that bad. When I made it, I could see it. I'm very sorry. Yeah. But the people have to cross the Jordan River. And God tells Joshua, let the priests walk into the river, carrying the tabernacle. And as soon as the priests step into the river, the water stops flowing. So all the water stops, all the water that's there continues to flow, and a path emerges from the river. And as long as the priests are standing in the middle of the river, no water flows through the river. So the whole nation, all the people of Israel, are able to cross the river. And that's what we also read. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away, and the water below that point flowed onto the Dead Sea, until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. And this is the second time we see the people of Israel cross through a body of water. The first time is through the Red Sea, when Moses brings them out of slavery. And we often say that that's an image of that also points to baptism. Because baptism brings us out of slavery. And when I was thinking about that, I think this is a significant one too. Because through the Jordan, people of Israel go into God's promised land. And I like to think that baptism also is a symbol for us to leave slavery, but also to step into what God has ready for us, into God's promises. Nice. So it's not just being brought out of slavery, but also being brought into promises God has for us.
Nice.
And then after crossing the Jordan, I would think that Joshua is ready for war. Because that's what they're doing. They have to go into war to take the land of all the people living there, the Canaanites. But that's not the first thing he does. The first thing he does is go to the camp and he says to all the men that they have to be circumcised. Because during the 40 years in the wilderness, they haven't done this. So basically all the men are not circumcised at this point. And Joshua knows if we want to be successful, we have to follow God's commandments. Because we're in a covenant relationship with him. So the first thing he does is take time to circumcise all the men. Which sounds interesting, because it also means you're injuring all your warriors. They're into enemy territory, and the first thing they do is injure all their warriors, and they all have to take a rest for at least a couple of days, yes, before they are ready,
To walk.
to walk again, to move again, which is interesting, right? But at the same time, we also read that crossing the Jordan and God showing up again with stopping the water has all the Canaanite people and the kings, it has them terrified. Because they think, who are those people? And who is their God that he is able to stop a river flow? So they're not attacked, they're safe, because no one dares to come towards them. Yeah.
Yeah, but what you are saying, like the Bible is full of these contradictory stories in the sense like they are harmed to people war, or like who wants to be the greater has to be the lower.
Yeah.
All this
Amen.
Upside down or counterintuitive.
It's I think that's going to be a big theme tonight. That often our ideas of how to do something is not how God wants to do it. And it takes courage, it takes trust to follow his plans and to actually believe that his ways are better than ours. Yeah. But eventually they are ready to fight. And the first battle is not some small town, but this is also terrible.
Higher quality.
Higher quality images, Don't just Google images and take them into your slideshow. The first city they conquer is Jericho. And Jericho was a big city, a walled city, so it's not easy to conquer. And the Lord says to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and all its strong warriors. And I think we all know what happened, because they don't just go with their army and fight, but God tells them to walk around the city, carrying the ark again. And for 6 days, they walk around the city. And on the 7th day, they walk around the city 7 times. And the last time, they have to make as much noise as they can, blow on the trumpets. And when they obey God, the walls of the city came crashing down, and the army of Israel could just walk in and take the city. And now for just a quick archaeological fact, they actually found the place where this was, where Jericho was in this time. It's called Tel Es Sultan, and it's ancient Jericho where they found collapsed walls and burned layers that are dated back towards 1400 before Christ. So they think that might be the walls around Jericho that actually fell down on this day, in this story. And that's just a reminder that the Bible is not just stories, but it's actually real places, real events, and real history. So this is one example where we see that the Israelites have to follow God's plans, godly tactics, I like to call it. Because they have to walk around the city and God gives them the victory. It's about obedience. It's not about just power and strength. But then they have taken over the city and God gives them a rule. He says in Joshua chapter 6, verse 18 and 19, Do not take any of the things set apart for destruction, or you yourselves will be completely destroyed, and you will bring trouble on the camp of Israel. Everything made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron is sacred to the Lord and must be brought into his treasury. So they were not allowed to take anything for themselves. And that's going to be important, because the next thing that happens, and they have their first victory, they're probably really excited, they want to move on. And then they fight a next town, the town of Ai. And at the town of Ai, the Israelites suffer a defeat. They think, oh, this is just a small town. Yes, it was. So they sent only 3,000 warriors, thinking, oh, this is an easy victory. But those 3,000 warriors are defeated by the people of Ai. They are followed and scared away, and they actually lose some people. So approximately 3,000 warriors were sent, but they were soundly defeated. The men of Ai chased the Israelites from the town gate as far as the quarries, and they killed about 36 who were retreating down the slope. And when the warriors come back to the camp, Joshua doesn't understand what happened. So he calls the elders of all the tribes to him. They get on their knees and they pray. God, what happened? Why is this happening? And God speaks. God speaks to him, and he says there is sin among people. They haven't obeyed my commands, they haven't obeyed my rules. And I'm going to show you what happened and was sinful. So the next day, the whole nation, all the tribes come together, and like they did in those days, they cast lots. So they do it one time, and the tribe of Judah is singled out. So something happened in the tribe of Judah. They cast lots again, and it falls on the clan of Sarah. They do it again, and it's on the family of Zimri. And all the people of this family come forward. They call lots again, and one person is singled out. And that is Achan, and he stole something. When he's singled out, Joshua asks him, "What did you do?" And he admits, "Oh, I took something from Jericho. I took a beautiful robe, a bar of gold, and 200 silver coins." So he tells them, "I buried them in my tent, my family tent." So Joshua goes there. They dig. They find the goods. And then he and his family are punished for his sin. And once again, Joshua and the people try to take Ai, and this time they are successful. And they take over. So you see that the most important thing was the obedience to God and his commandments, to follow his ways. And before Joshua takes over Jericho, he sees an angel. And we read it's the commander of the Lord's armies. And Joshua asks him, "Whose side are you on?" And he says, "I'm on neither side." And after reading those two stories, I think that means that God just doesn't pick a side in this fight, in this war, but he's looking who is following me. And he gives victory to who's actually following him. So here we also see that God is faithful, but he also wants the Israelites to be obedient to him. Well, these are two examples of how the conquest went. There's a couple more stories, but I don't have time to cover them. But in all those stories, obedience to God is the most important thing. And eventually, Joshua has conquered a big part of the promised land, but not everything. It's sad that this is very vague too, but the most important thing is here you see the tribal allotments. We read about that in Joshua chapter 12 to 21, and it basically describes very detailed what tribe gets what area of land. And on this picture, you see the situation in Joshua. So around chapter 12, this is what they've conquered, the pink area. So you see that, especially along the coast, there's a lot of ground, a lot of land that they haven't conquered, which means that there are still other people living there. Along the coast, especially the Philistines. We'll learn more about that in Judges. So the conquest wasn't fully completed yet. But all the tribes get their land, and God says, okay, it's now every tribe's own responsibility to take over the rest of the land. So it wasn't something anymore that they did together, it's all the tribes. But every tribe has to make sure they conquer their own land. And then at the end of Joshua, we have Joshua's farewell speech. And just like Moses, he reminds them of the covenant and how important it is to serve the Lord alone. Don't go into idol worship. Don't follow any other gods. Serve the Lord alone. So fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River in Egypt. Serve the Lord alone and follow all of his commandments. So that's, in short, the book of Joshua. And the question is, without Joshua as a leader, are they going to be able to hold on to the covenant, to all the commandments God gave them? And will they conquer the rest of the land? They are in the promised land now, but they are challenged to remain faithful. And that brings us in the next book, which is the book of Judges. I'm just laughing while I'm speaking, sorry. And Judges starts right after the book of Joshua. And actually the first question we have in Judges is, okay, who's going to fight first? Which tribe is going to try to conquer more land first? That's what it starts with. And we have this couple stories of tribes trying to take more land. Sometimes they are successful, sometimes they are not. But what's important is the nation of Israel doesn't have a strong leader anymore. Because after Moses, there's not one person that stands up as a leader. So all the tribes are kind of on their own now. And the people slowly start to drift away from God. The key verse that sums up the book of Judges comes at the very end. I'm going to read it now. It says, in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's where the chaos starts. Because if everyone did what was right in their own eyes, they start sliding away. More and more they forget about God's commandments, and more they start to worship idols. Everyone has their own standards of what's right and what's wrong. And the book of Judges has, in my opinion, some of the wildest and craziest stories you might find in the Bible. And I remember in my Bible school reading through this in small group in one afternoon. And I had a very weird feeling when we were finished, because it's so sad. It's almost depressing in how many mistakes the Israelites could make. But still, it's part of the Bible, and it still shows us something of what God is trying to do, and it's part of God's redemptive plan. So we have to talk about it and see what we can learn. Oh, this is even worse. It worked. I couldn't download it
We
properly.
trust you, don't worry.
Okay, I'm going to explain this slide. I'm just going to
Maybe just start it again.
Yeah,
You
maybe
might be able to fix it, but I can explain it to you. It's fine.
you can also just reload it. Maybe.
Yeah, I downloaded it as a. Oh, this is not downloaded actually. It's PDF. I can try to do this.
Sometimes if you just refresh.
Oh, there
Yeah.
it was.
One of the two was right.
Oh, you're gonna say it's not. It's gone now.
Everybody pray.
Do you
Everybody's
wanna
ready. I'll put on my hotspot and do it again.
set?
Give me
You
one.
can also connect to the lookup.
It's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
What?
Jesus loves you.
Thank you.
Jesus.
I have my own hotspot, so it should work.
Okay.
Maar zij heeft geen sms.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, just Jesus loves you.
Yeah, you can type the password. You don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have it. I try my own again.
You need to finish the song.
Ja, ik heb hem op mijn telefoon, maar niet, ik kan hem nu niet stoppen.
Ah.
Anders kan je hem wel gewoon inzien. Als je hem al verbonden bent, kan je hem gewoon zien.
That was fun. I think this is also just a sign. The images were so bad. I think I have to continue without.
It's okay, I'll use my hotspot.
I'm actually trying.
Oh, ik heb het wachtwoord.
Allemaal goed luisteren.
Allemaal kijken ook. So, where I was going. Because in Judges, we have this thing, this downward spiral. Which means every time people of Israel do worse and worse and worse. And every time the people sin, God gives them over to one of his enemies, one of their enemies. So there's going to be a king from the Midianites, from the Canaanites, from the Philistines, someone who's going to oppress the Israelites. And in this time that they're oppressed, the Israelites start to cry out to God, God, why is this happening to us? Please help us. And God doesn't forget his people, he's faithful, he's with them. So he raises up a judge. And the judge, see, it works.
So nice.
It works. Come on! Woo! Let's go!
And a judge wasn't the king, a judge was just like a regional leader. So Israel had many judges, and they weren't all in the same place. Here you see all the tribes and the land that they should have, and all the names of all the judges we read about in the book. So you see that they're scattered across the whole land of Israel. So these stories we read are always about a tribe or about a couple tribes, a certain area. So God raises up a judge. The judge, defeats the enemy in some way, and there is a time of peace where there's no oppression, the Israelites follow God's commandments, and they're in this good place. But that's only for a while, and they fall back into sin again, worse than before. And then again, God gives them to one of their enemies. There's oppression. Again, they cry out to God, God, why is this happening to us? And this is what happens over and over and over in the book of Judges. As you see, there's many judges, but there is 7 of these cycles that you can see if you read through the book. And it goes, it's progressively worse what happens. Now, I hope this works. This was the other one. Here you see the cycle. There's a time of relative peace, the Israelites sin, there's oppression, they repent, they're delivered by a judge, and then it goes once again. Credits to the Bible Project, this is one of their pictures. It's a very good source. That Bible was displayed. And I'm going to talk about 3 of the judges, 3 of the ones with like bigger stories. And the first one we're going to talk about is Deborah. Deborah the prophetess, one of the few women that has a place of leadership in the Old Testament, and the only female judge we read about. So Deborah was a prophetess. She had her place under a tree where she would sit, she would prophesy, she would speak to the people, and she is called to be a judge. And she receives a prophecy to call for a man named Barak. And she says to Barak, you have to go, you have to call an army and go against General Sisera. But Barak says that he doesn't want to go alone. So he asks Deborah to come with him. Deborah agrees, but she says, if I go with you, the victory we have will be of the hands of a woman. You will not get any credit for this. It will go to the hand of a woman. And we read about Deborah, that she arose as a mother to those in Israel.
Mm.
So they go into battle, and God gives the victory once again. But Sisera manages to escape. And he tries to hide in a tent. In a tent of someone named Haber. And Haber was one of Sisera's allies, he thought. But eventually he falls asleep there, and Haber's wife actually kills Sisera with a tent peg. So it's a great story. So in this story, there's actually two women with a main role. And it was said, Deborah said, by the hand of a woman, we'll have this victory. So the question is that the hand of Deborah or the hand of Jael, who eventually killed Sisera? Two women that lead Israel to victory, showing that God can use anyone, in any time, anywhere, and that the only thing that's important is to trust Him. Because in this time, it wasn't used. It wasn't common that a woman would be in a place of leadership, and especially not in war. The second judge I want to talk about is someone you might have heard of, Gideon. Gideon is this man who we hear a lot of stories about in Sunday school, and there's going to be another judge we talk about you've all heard of in Sunday school. And one of the things I also want you to see is that I remember those Sunday school stories, that there was always almost heroic in the sense of these guys, they knew what they were doing. But if you actually read what the Bible says clearly, you see that they also had doubts or insecure or made mistakes. Gideon calls himself the least of the least. He's from the smallest tribe and even from the smallest family. And he says to God, God, why do you call me? What can I do? But then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. And then Gideon is to call an army. You might also remember a story with a piece of wool he lays outside, where he asks God for a sign. Because he knows God has called him, but is he really able to do this? And God answers. God listens to his question. His question was, I put this wool outside, I want it to be dry, and all the ground around it has to be wet. Okay, it happens. But it wasn't enough for Gideon. Because the next night, he asks again, God, I put this piece of wool outside. This time, turn it around. So the piece of wool has to be wet, and all the ground around it has to be dry. And once again, God answers, and it happens as he asks. So Gideon is this hero that we hear of, because he will be successful in what he's doing and what God asked. But he also doubted himself. But we have a God that is loving and faithful, and he confirms Gideon in his doubts. Then God even brings his army down from 32,000 warriors all the way to 300. People who want to go home, miss their families, can go. And eventually, Gideon has to make them drink water, and only if they drink in a certain way, those are the men that go with him to battle. So there's only 300 men left to fight. And once again, you see a godly tactic in how God brings the victory. Because those 300 men don't even have to fight. During the night, they go to the Midianite camp, they all hold a torch, and they all have a horn. And they make a lot of noise, and during the night, they see all those torches. It looks like, because they're on three sides of the camp, it looks like the Midianites are surrounded, and there's this big army. And then God also brings confusion in the Midianite camp, and they start fighting each other. So once again here we see that God gives the victory. And I think it's just, all these godly tactics is to show that it's not the Israelite strength, but God who saves them and who brings them where they have to be. And then the third and last judge I want to talk about is Samson, our strong man, who finally, it's there. Eventually he's going to share a secret, but that's not where we start. I think he's maybe the most famous judge, and I wrote down what he did. He is the man who ripped a lion apart with his bare hands, lifted up city gates, and took them on his shoulders. He then was seduced by a woman and shared his secret with her, even though it was the fourth time she tried. And then eventually he is the man who pushed down pillars of a temple to kill himself and 30,000 of his enemies. Samson is strong, but he also was impulsive. And Samson is something that we also read here. He is a Nazarite. I want to explain a little bit on what that is. Being a Nazarite was something that is in the law. Being a priest was only meant for the Levites. But normal people from other tribes could also dedicate their lives more to God, to Yahweh, by taking the Nazarite's vow. And this means, Nazarite literally means to be set apart. So it means that you set apart even more of your life for God. So there were a few rules that a Nazarite had to follow. You couldn't drink any wine or alcohol. You couldn't cut your hair. And you can't touch anything or anyone that's dead, because that's unclean. And Samson is a Nazarite for all of his life. Some people, you could do it for a certain time of your life, so you could be a Nazarite for a year and then just move on. But Samson was a Nazarite for life. His life was dedicated to God. But Samson doesn't follow the commitments he has to follow. Because we also read a story where he sees a carcass of a lion, and in this carcass is fresh honey. But he can't take it because the lion is dead. But he still does. So he breaks his commitment. We also read about him and his wedding festivities, and some people think that he also drank alcohol there. We don't really read that, but if you read between the lines, it is a possibility. But he not even disobeyed the Nazarite laws, he also disobeyed some of just the normal laws that God gave. Because one of those laws is that Israelites could not intermarry. They couldn't marry someone from a different nation. And it was because there was a danger for idol worship. But Samson was to marry a Philistine woman. So Samson, while being this hero, fighting against the Philistines, also makes a lot of mistakes during his lifetime. And his life is almost like a picture of the wasted potential he had, because I think he could have done so much more. And eventually, you might know the story of how he loses his strength. Because 3 times Delilah tries to reveal his secret, and 3 times he lies to her. He tells something else. The real secret, of course, is cutting his hair. But eventually, she just keeps asking, keeps nagging about it. He does share his secret with her, and he tells her, if someone cuts off my hair, I will lose all my strength. And that's exactly what happens. And I started with it. But then, when his hair is cut off, he's taken prisoner by the Philistines. He's brought into this temple to mock him. There's 30,000 people there. And he prays to God once more, God, give me strength. And he pulls down or pushes away the pillars, and the whole building collapses. And he and all these Philistines die. So here again we see that Samson makes mistakes. But it's a reminder that God's purposes go forward, even through imperfect people. But also that compromise of what God's asking always comes with a cost. Then we continue to the last 3-4 chapters of Judges, and there's even more moral decline. There's 2 stories going on. We're going through them step by step. There's this man named Micah, and he makes his own idol. So he has an idol in his house that he worships. And not just an idol, he also takes into his house a Levite. And this Levite lives with him to do all the priestly offerings to this idol. So it's not just Micah that's worshipping this idol, but there's also a Levite, people that were dedicated to worship and serve God, that goes into idolatry and worships this idol. Then the tribe of Dan, they actually steal this idol, and they also take the Levite with them to move into new lands, and there they start worshipping this idol. So you see that idolatry was in so many places. And the second story in those chapters is even worse. It's the story of the Levite and his concubine. I'm just going to briefly tell you what happens and read it yourself. The Levite's concubine is abused in a city where they are guests and murdered. The Levite then decides to cut up her body in 12 parts, and he sends a part of her body to every tribe of Israel. And his message is, look, see what they have done. And the tribes react. I saw your facial reaction. I think the people of Israel also had that reaction. And all the tribes come together and they wage war among themselves. They wage war against the tribe. It says the tribe of Judah. That's not right. It's supposed to be the tribe of Benjamin. Oh, I'm sorry. That was my mistake. So they fight against the tribe of Benjamin. And they actually kill almost everyone. There is 600 men that survive. That's everything that's left of the tribe of Benjamin after that. But then Israel, all the tribes see a problem. Because if they don't do anything, the tribe of Benjamin is going to cease to exist. Because there's no women left. And the other tribes made a vow to not give their daughters in marriage to those men. And then they think, we can't let that happen. We're 12 tribes, we're supposed to be 12 tribes, so we have to find a solution. Well, they have a solution. There was one town that decided not to help fight against the tribe of Benjamin. a town called Jabesh Gilead. And all the tribes together decide to send their best warriors to this town and to fight against them, kill everyone, and take only the women that are still virgin as captives. They find 400 women. So they give these 400 women to the tribe of Benjamin.
600.
But it was 600, so there's still 200 women
Missing.
needed. There's still 200 missing, needed, yeah. So they have to think of a different plan. And then they're like, yeah, well, we said we shouldn't give our daughters in marriage. But what if you go to this certain town, Shiloh, and just the Benjamites, so the men of Benjamin, just go there, lay in fields, and when women come out of the city, you just take them. That was their solution. That was their solution to the problem. Just take them, go back to your own tribe, go back to your own land, take them as your wives, and go on. And this just sums up the book of Judges. Because we talked about a downward spiral. This is the worst of the worst. They hit rock bottom. Exactly. Yeah, it's so sad. Kidnapping a woman to save a tribe. They didn't break their vows, but it's still terrible. So it's chaos. A nation that was called to be a holy nation, as an example to everyone around them, is probably even worse than the nations around them. And they're not showing who God is to those nations, which is what they're supposed to do. And I said it in the beginning, Judges ends with this verse. In those days, Israel had no king. No earthly king, but they also didn't see God as their king. And all the people did whatever was right in their own eyes. And this is where that brings them. The message is clear. Without God, people lose their moral compasses. And it makes them long for a righteous king, one who will bring justice and peace. And that brings us to the book of Ruth. As I said in the beginning, the story of Ruth takes place in the time of Judges, and it's just this tiny light shining in the darkness. Because the story of Ruth, I think most of you know it, just is such a beautiful story, and it's actually crazy to think of that happened in this time. But it also shows us that there's always a remnant, a group of people that will be faithful to God. And that is also a theme that we will see throughout the Old Testament. We'll go into that more in the rest of our overview series. But whenever Israel turns away from God, there is always this group of people that remains faithful to Him. So let's talk about Ruth. In the days when the judges ruled, a dark time, the story of Ruth shines as a light, a story that gives hope. Hope in darker times for the people of Israel, but also a story of hope to us. God is still at work, even when the world might look faithless. And Ruth was a Moabite woman, so she was a foreigner, who chooses to follow her mother-in-law back to a different country. Naomi actually moved to Moab because of a famine in the land of Israel. She moves there with her husband and her 2 sons. Her sons get married, but her husband and the husbands of her sons, they all die, and Naomi decides to go back to her own country, and Ruth follows her. And then we have this famous verse, Ruth 1:16. Don't ask me to leave and turn back. Wherever you will go, I will go. Wherever you live, I live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So she says, I want to be of your people, I want to be an Israelite. But she also says, I want your God to be my God. So she doesn't only dedicate herself to Naomi, she also dedicates herself to Yahweh. And they move back, and I can imagine they had a rough time. 2 women, 1 older woman and a foreigner, come back to their town, Bethlehem, with nothing. And they have to, well, make a living for themselves. So Ruth decides to go into the harvest fields to pick up the grain that was left behind. And she does it at the fields of Boaz, a wealthy man who also seems to follow the commandments of God. Because it was actually a commandment, it was a law, that farmers were to leave some of their harvest for the poor, for the widows, for the foreigners. And Boaz does this. And he actually says, leave a little bit more, so Ruth can gather that. We read about this law in both Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And Boaz is also called the kinsman redeemer. And that is also something I want to explain a little bit. It's also a law that they had, that if there was someone who needed help, and it could be in different ways, to protect, to restore the family's well-being when it was in trouble, or to rescue them, it was the duty of the kinsman redeemer to do this. And the kinsman redeemer was the closest male relative you had. So in this case, Ruth finds out through Naomi that Boaz is their family member, and Boaz can redeem them. So Ruth goes to Boaz, they talk about this. And Boaz is a man that follows the law, and he says to Ruth, well, I want to do this, but there actually is someone who is even closer related to you. So let me go to him first. So the next day, Boaz finds this man, and he tells him, well, you have to buy Naomi's land. And he's like, yeah, I can do that. But you also have to redeem Ruth, so the family line can continue. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. And then Boaz steps in and he tells him, oh, I want to, so if you're okay, I will redeem Ruth and her family. And then Ruth and Boaz get married. So Boaz is a redeemer. And I think this concept of redemption also points us into the future to Jesus, who is our ultimate redeemer, who also restores our brokenness and brings us into his family.
Can I ask you? Yeah. You said like they talked about it, Boaz and Ruth.
Yeah.
But Ruth laid at his feet in the night.
Yeah.
Right? It's not really. It was
True.
more. It was also kind of an honor thing.
It was
right?
an honor thing. She
Yeah.
makes herself pretty. She lays at his feet.
Yeah.
He wakes up, and then they talk about it. So it's also she offered herself to him to redeem her.
Yeah.
And I think he chooses the way of honor to do that in the right way. You can talk a lot about that part.
Yeah.
We don't have time for that, so I decided to not go into that. But that's true. And then at the end of the book of Ruth, I have to go to a close because it's almost time. We do have a genealogy, because we read that Ruth and Boaz have a son named Obed. Obed becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, Israel's great king. We'll talk about him next week. And from that line also comes the Messiah. So the story of Ruth also shows us that a foreign woman is brought into God's people, even in the line where Jesus came from. So a Moabite woman becomes part of the family line of Jesus. God welcomes in not only Israelites, but everyone who wants to be faithful to him. So just to wrap us up, what we talked about, the book of Joshua shows us that God keeps his promises if we're obedient to him and his commandments. Judges shows us what happens when people turn away from him. And then Ruth shows us that even in times of unfaithfulness, in the time of Judges, God remains faithful, working through ordinary people like Ruth and Boaz. And that's where I'm gonna end for tonight. I just want to end in prayer, and then we'll head into break. Have a